Yes, still Valerija, but now from Telia. Um, yeah, probably the last time I can use that, so I need to take the time and yeah, enjoy it. Okay, ZR Plus. We've had, okay, first few questions. I put them there because I knew I'll jump into it and I'll forget them, but let's try to put you in some boxes, and apologies for that in advance. But how many here identify themselves as IP engineers? People working with the IP network in general. Your options are IP or WDM, and I mean, it can be, okay, IP primarily. What about WDM? Oh, actually more than I expected. Yeah, some shaking, but that counts. And how many are doing ZR Plus or planning to do it in the near future? As in this year? Okay, that's also, yeah, okay, you don't count. Okay, that's actually more than expected as well. And if I'm boring you, then yeah, apologies for that in advance. We've had a very nice talk actually earlier today on what open optical networks are. So I will not bore you with too much of the details, but basically this drawing pretty much shows what we in Telia have been looking at. So the top diagram is a traditional closed WDM system where you have the two IP routers on the ends and then a single color for all the WDM boxes in the middle, meaning they're provided by one single vendor. And what we would really like to move forward is open optical networks or open optical line systems, which means that you can basically take a transponder from any vendor, or this could also be a coherent pluggable that you plug in your IP router, and then you would be able to still have this working with your optical vendor supporting you along the way. The benefits, obviously, when one looks at this, I took some numbers from what Aurelian has publicly announced, and there are significant cost savings in doing this. So obviously, from an operator perspective, this is actually quite interesting to look at. And that was the same case for us. We kind of looked at this. We were building a new interregional WDM network, and we wanted that to be open. So we said, what more could we do? Could we do coherent pluggables? So the first step is, go, no go. Should we be doing this? What are the technical considerations when you want to do this? What are the technical requirements? One thing is, of course, your IP routers. Do you have the hardware there to support doing this? Do you have the software there to support doing this? And, your optical OLS. I mean, is this closed, open? It may define a bit the amount of support you get from your vendor, right? We were fine with the hardware. Software releases, we knew that's coming, so we weren't too concerned to get started. And as mentioned, we were aiming to go for an open OLS, so it was kind of like ticking all the boxes and making sure that, okay, we are now ready for the next step. And the next step is really to ask yourselves if one should be doing this. As many telecom operators, I assume, the way this usually works is you have an IP team and you have a WDM team, and they don't talk much to each other, and it's quite siloed, right? And how are you going to now change that way? How are you going to make people work together and do IP over WDM? A big portion of what having a coherent pluggable is, what this means for the network, is that you're inherently taking a part of your optical network, you're putting that into the hands of your IP engineers, which may or may not know what they're doing, because if they don't know about the underlying WDM network, then they're not aware what can go wrong here, right? So you really, in this process, need to maybe involve and pay special attention to what do the WDM engineers say and think about this, and how this should be, how this should be realized going forward. So what did we do? We said, okay, that's not an issue. We'll deal with that, later as we go. We'll focus on trainings. Let's deploy it. How do we deploy this? Where do we start? So our interregional WDM network we identified several links that we wanted to investigate this performance. And for those of you that have done WDM planning, you know that you don't just go and deploy things. When you are doing WDM, you actually have to go and plan first. So go in a simulation tool in which you'll validate the performance and make sure that this would actually work when you go in the field. And when it's a closed WDM system, this is easy to simulate in the sense that it's all the elements are provided by the same vendor. When it is an open OLS, neither vendor has the full picture, right? Not the vendor providing the 0+, neither does the vendor providing the OLS. So in our case, we asked both of them to kind of look into it, simulate it, knowing we'll get kind of a partial picture of what this would look like. And it was really partial to start with, because they kind of came, like half of the responses we got were conflicting, so we kind of weren't sure really how will this look like. And we said, okay, maybe let's try to do a field trial, and do that field trial with the solely purpose of validating, which vendor is closer and what should we be expecting when planning where to deploy it. So what we did is we took one link that was a sure yes, where both vendors said, yes, this will work. And two maybe links, so two links for which this one vendor said no, one vendor said yes. And we said, let's test that. So the test was rather simple. We were not trying to break any record. It's also tough if you have to beat 1,800 kilometers in Denmark. The three links were like one really short, one middle, and a bit longer link with a different setup, either ROADM to ROADM or with some ILS in betweens. And we used Cisco IP routers with a ZR+ and some Nokia-based OLS. Testing with a single native channel originating from a Nokia optical transponder box, going in the same OLS together with the ZR+. The conclusion was that it actually worked on all three links. So the measured performance was closer to what the ZR+ vendor had provided. Though, of course, these were not directly comparable in the sense that when you do the planning and the validation, you actually account for some end-of-life margins. But at least we were kind of confident that, okay, we should keep on going with this. Next, even more testing in the lab, stress testing, modes, different modes, and so on, speeds, as well as how do we do this? How do we put all these processes in place? Who will be planning this? Who will be implementing this? Who will be operating this? When to involve which vendor, right? And upskilling of engineers, both IP and WDM. And what we did is we actually started by just offering a basic WDM training to the IP engineers. So not even talking about ZR+, but just WDM basics. And what happened shortly after those trainings is actually that one IP engineer was able to identify a fault, a specific fault scenario in the WDM network that would have caused a specific fault in the IP network. Now, this was not something we could have identified before, right? And I started by saying the main benefits for doing this, that's cost. And, the challenge is the operational aspects of this and your IP and WDM people being siloed. But truly, if you overcome that challenge, this can be a very rewarding exercise, because what you then do is you really open up for building a much better network than what you were able to do before. So keep that in mind if you are doing it, or maybe we'll consider doing it, for sure. Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'm from Alexei Red, and we got also some experience with IP over DWDM. And have you got your equipment software ready from the day one, once you began this journey? Or you need to chase a vendor to get this upgrade, to get all the capabilities that you require in this project?
It was fun because at the beginning when we had to do all the planning, it was a lot about chasing, but we also knew that if you do an open optical network, you are the integrator. You're the one that has the responsibility of putting all the vendors and all of their equipment And we kind of accepted on that. We're in the process of putting it in productions. The final processes are being finalized, so it's still not live. The WDM network is installed. It's just a matter of turning it on and saying, okay, now we use this for actual live traffic. So how much we'll be chasing them for operational purposes, I'll tell you next year.
Oh, thanks.
Hi, Wilhelm here again. I got kind of intrigued by the WDM crash course you were mentioning. Did you build the material yourself? Do you have any nice reference material you would recommend for an IP guy who would like to know more? Thanks.
We used the knowledge of it was internal training. So, taking literally our WDM engineer and saying, tell them what you do to our IP engineers. And I actually think if you do that, then you also make those people start talking to each other. I did a fun exercise at one point where I said, when you say link, a link in the IP, for the IP guys, is actually different than what a link is in the WDM domain. So start by thinking of the terminology you use. But just making them talk and then align and understand how they use the language, that's, I think, a good enough starting point. I can come up with some suggestions for literature otherwise if you, And then promise me you'll ask the WDM guys next year some questions, because if it's an optical talk, there are never questions from you IP guys. Okay, thank you.
Please give a big hand to Valerija.
Oh, yeah.